My name is Harper. I'm 28 years old, and I'll never forget the moment I read my dad's text message uninviting me from Thanksgiving. The words felt like a slap across the face. You embarrassed your sister at her engagement party. After everything you'd done to support Brianna, after biting my tongue through years of being treated like I was invisible, this was how he chose to handle it. I stared at my phone in disbelief, my hands shaking as I reread those cold, clinical words. No phone call, no conversation, just a text message ending a tradition it held onto like a lifeline. But 3 days later, my sister's perfect boyfriend showed up at my door with a confession that changed everything. Before we dive into what happened next, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, hit that like button because you're not alone. Subscribe and turn on notifications because this story gets wild, and trust me, you'll want to hear how karma works in mysterious ways. Now let me take you back to where this all started. Growing up in suburban Chicago, I learned early that some children are born to shine, while others are meant to stand in the shadows and clap. I was 12 years old when my mom died from breast cancer, and in the chaos of grief that followed, my dad remarried within 18 months to a woman named Diane, who came with her own agenda and her own vision for our family. Diane had a daughter from her previous marriage, my sister Brianna, who was 3 years younger than me and who became the instant centerpiece of our reconstructed family. My dad, Richard, was a successful corporate attorney who worked 70-hour weeks and seemed relieved to hand over the emotional labor of parenting to his new wife. What he didn't see, or chose not to see, was how Diane systematically elevated her biological daughter while pushing me further and further into the margins of my own family. The favoritism wasn't subtle, though everyone pretended not to notice. When Brianna turned 16, she got a brand new Honda Civic with a bow on top, presented at her birthday party in front of all her friends, while my dad made a speech about his princess deserving the best. When I turned 16 2 years earlier, I'd been told that a car was a privilege to be earned, and I'd spent an entire summer working at a grocery store to buy a beat-up Toyota with 150,000 miles on it. College applications brought more of the same painful disparity. Brianna's tuition to a private liberal arts school was paid in full, no questions asked, no expectations of contribution. My state school education came with partial help and a lecture about the importance of financial responsibility and student loans building character. Every achievement I managed to scrape together despite the uneven playing field was met with a polite nod, while Brianna's mediocre accomplishments were celebrated with elaborate dinner parties and social media announcements that made my dad look like Father of the Year. By the time I reached adulthood, I'd built a life that existed almost entirely separate from my family. I worked as a freelance graphic designer, struggling financially but fiercely independent, because I'd learned that asking my dad for help came with strings attached and subtle reminders of how I wasn't living up to expectations. My apartment was small, a studio in a neighborhood that real estate agents called up and coming, but that really just meant affordable, and I was proud of it because it was mine and nobody could take it away or hold it over my head. Meanwhile, Brianna had transformed herself into an Instagram influencer, with 200,000 followers who documented her supposedly perfect life in carefully curated posts that showed designer handbags and tropical vacations and candid moments that took 47 takes to capture. She posted constantly about her amazing family, about how blessed she was, about the unconditional love that surrounded her, and I noticed that in the past 5 years, it'd been systematically cropped out of every family photo she shared, erased from the narrative she was selling to strangers on the internet. 2 months before that terrible Thanksgiving, Brianna announced her engagement to a man named Preston who came from old money on the East Coast and worked in finance doing something vague but apparently lucrative. My dad was absolutely thrilled, already planning the wedding of the century and talking about how proud he was that his daughter had found such an accomplished partner. The engagement party was scheduled for 3 weeks before Thanksgiving at an expensive country club, and even though I could barely afford the gift I bought or the dress I needed for the occasion, I felt obligated to attend because some small part of me still hoped that maybe this time, maybe at this event, my family would see me and acknowledge that I existed and mattered too. The country club was the kind of place where the parking valets judged your car and the waiters looked through you if you weren't wearing the right brands. I pulled up in my decade-old Toyota, watching luxury vehicles glide past me, and took a deep breath before walking into the reception hall, where over 100 guests had gathered to celebrate Brianna and Preston's future together. The room was decorated with white roses and gold accents, string lights creating a romantic ambiance, and a jazz quartet playing softly in the corner while people in expensive clothes sipped champagne and made conversation that sounded more like networking than celebrating. I arrived alone because Id recently ended a relationship that wasn't going anywhere, and I felt the weight of my solitude immediately as I watched couples and families cluster together while I stood near the entrance trying to figure out where I fit in this picture. Diane spotted me within minutes and made her way over with a smile that didn't reach her eyes and never had. "Oh, Harper, you came," she said in that tone she'd perfected over the years. The one that sounded sweet to anyone listening but carried an unmistakable edge of judgment and dismissal. "We weren't sure you'd have something appropriate to wear. But that dress is lovely," she continued, her gaze traveling up and down my outfit in a way that made me feel like I was being appraised and found wanting. I thanked her quietly and moved away, searching for my dad in the crowd, finally spotting him near the bar surrounded by Preston's family and colleagues, holding court and looking more animated than I'd seen him in years. I walked toward him, preparing to say hello, but he barely glanced in my direction before turning back to his conversation, and I stood there for a long moment before realizing he wasn't going to acknowledge me, and walking away with heat rising in my cheeks. During the cocktail hour, I found myself near the hors d'oeuvres table, trying to look occupied by examining the catering selection, when a man about my age approached and introduced himself as Garrett, Preston's cousin from Boston. He had an easy smile and seemed genuinely friendly, asking how I knew the couple, and I told him I was the bride's sister. His eyebrows raised slightly and he said, "Oh, Brianna never mentioned having a sister," and the words landed like a punch to my stomach, even though I shouldn't have been surprised, because this was the story Brianna had been telling the world for years. I forced a laugh and said something about how we weren't that close, trying to make it sound casual, even though it hurt more than I wanted to admit. Our conversation shifted to safer topics, and Garrett mentioned he worked in venture capital and asked what I did for a living. When I told him about my graphic design work, his face lit up with genuine interest, explaining that his company was actually in the market for a designer to help with some branding projects, and asking if I'd be interested in sending over my portfolio. We exchanged business cards, and for a few minutes I felt seen and valued in a way I never did around my own family. What I didn't know was that across the room, Brianna had spotted us talking, and her expression had turned dark with an anger I couldn't understand because from my perspective, I'd barely said 10 words to anyone all night, and was just having a professional conversation. Later, after dinner had been served and toasts had been made celebrating the happy couple, Brianna pulled me aside with a grip on my arm that was tight enough to leave marks. "Why are you hitting on Preston's cousin?" she hissed at me, her perfectly made-up face twisted into something ugly that her Instagram followers would never believe existed. "This is my engagement party, and you're trying to steal attention like you always do." I stared at her in complete confusion, genuinely not understanding what she was talking about, explaining that Garrett and I had been discussing work and nothing more. She cut me off with a bitter laugh that attracted the attention of nearby guests. "You're trying to steal attention," she repeated louder, and I felt people turning to look at us. "You always do this," she continued, her voice rising. "This is exactly why Mom liked me better." The mention of our dead mother, my actual mother who Brianna had never even met, was so shocking and cruel that I couldn't form words. Before I could respond, my dad appeared and pulled me into a private room off the main hall, his face set in hard lines of disapproval. He didn't ask what happened or why Brianna was upset or whether I had anything to say in my own defense. Instead, he told me I needed to leave immediately because I'd upset my sister on her special day. I tried to explain that I'd done nothing wrong, that I'd barely interacted with anyone, that the conversation with Garrett had been completely innocent and professional, but he held up his hand, cutting me off mid-sentence. Brianna says you were flirting with Preston's family and trying to make her engagement about you, he said flatly, as if reading from a script Brianna had written for him. This behavior is inappropriate and embarrassing, and you need to leave now before you cause any more problems. Diane appeared in the doorway behind him, adding her voice to the chorus of condemnation. We should have known you'd cause drama, she said with a sad shake of her head that looked like pity but felt like triumph. You just can't stand to see Brianna happy. I left the country club that night with tears streaming down my face, walking past guests who stopped their conversations to stare at me, the family pariah being escorted out of yet another event where I didn't belong. I drove home in a blur of humiliation and confusion, pulling into my apartment parking lot and sitting in my car for an hour, trying to understand what had just happened and why my own family was so determined to believe the worst of me without ever asking for my side of the story. 2 weeks passed after the engagement party disaster. 2 weeks during which I tried to convince myself that things would blow over the way they always eventually did after family conflicts. I threw myself into work, taking on extra projects to distract myself from the hurt, telling myself that I was used to this pattern, and that eventually someone would reach out and wed, all pretend nothing had happened, because that's what we always did. But on the Monday evening before Thanksgiving week, my phone buzzed with a text message from my dad that shattered any hope I'd been clinging to. After what happened at the engagement party, we think it's best you don't come to Thanksgiving this year. The message read in stark black letters on my screen. Brianna needs to feel comfortable in her own family, and your presence would create unnecessary tension during what should be a joyful holiday. I read it 3 times before the meaning fully sank in. No phone call, no conversation, no opportunity to defend myself or explain or even apologize for whatever imaginary crime I'd supposedly committed. Just a cold, clinical text message uninviting me from a family tradition I'd never missed in 28 years of life. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely type out a response asking if we could please talk about this in person or at least over the phone. I watched the dots appear showing he was typing, then disappear, then appear again. And finally his response came through. There's nothing to discuss, Harper. The decision is made, and it's final. Well, reassess our family dynamics after the holidays. I called him immediately, but the phone went straight to voicemail, and when I tried again 10 minutes later, the same thing happened. Making it clear he'd deliberately sent my number to automatic rejection. I sat on my couch staring at the wall as the reality set in. This would be my first Thanksgiving alone, completely alone, without family or tradition or any sense of belonging to something bigger than myself. The devastation was physical, a weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. And I spent that entire night crying into my pillow while my mind replayed every moment of the engagement party, trying to figure out what had done that was so terrible it warranted this level of punishment. In the days that followed, I tried reaching out to other family members, hoping someone would listen to my side or at least acknowledge that this situation seemed extreme. I texted Brianna directly, apologizing for any misunderstanding and asking if we could talk things through, but I quickly discovered she'd blocked my number entirely. I called my dad's sister, my Aunt Lorraine, who I'd always thought liked me reasonably well, but her voice was cold when she answered. I heard what you did at the party, Harper, she said, before I could even explain why I was calling. You really should apologize to your sister instead of trying to rally people to your side. It became clear very quickly that Brianna's version of events had spread through the entire family like a virus, and nobody was interested in hearing any perspective but hers. My cousin Melissa, who I'd been close with growing up, sent me a brief text saying she couldn't get involved in family drama and asking me not to contact her about it. One by one, every person I tried to reach either ignored me completely or made it clear they'd already chosen sides and I'd lost. The emotional isolation was suffocating in a way I'd never experienced before. I'd spent years feeling invisible in my family, but this was different. This was active rejection, deliberate exclusion, a coordinated effort to push me out entirely. I couldn't work, couldn't eat, couldn't focus on anything except the constant loop of questions in my head. Had I actually done something wrong without realizing it? Was I the villain in this story? Had years of feeling overlooked warped my perception so badly that I'd become the problem I thought everyone else was? My best friend Savannah came over one evening and found me in a state of complete breakdown, and she sat with me for hours reassuring me that I'd done absolutely nothing wrong and that my family's behavior was abusive and toxic. But even her support couldn't fully quiet the voice of doubt that had taken root in my mind, the voice that whispered maybe they were right about me, maybe I was the problem, maybe I deserved this. Thanksgiving Day arrived with cold gray skies and a silence in my apartment that felt oppressive. I'd decided to volunteer at a homeless shelter because the thought of sitting alone in my studio all day was unbearable, and at least serving meals to people in need would give me something useful to do with the holiday. I spent the morning ladling mashed potatoes onto plates and trying not to make eye contact with the other volunteers who were there with their families, mothers and daughters working side by side, fathers and sons joking around in the kitchen. When my shift ended in the late afternoon, I walked back to my apartment through streets that smelled like turkey and stuffing, past houses where I could see families gathered through lit windows, everyone belonging somewhere except me. I ordered Chinese takeout for dinner, something I'd never done on Thanksgiving before, and sat cross-legged on my couch trying to convince myself not to look at social media but ultimately failing because I couldn't help myself. Brianna's Instagram was full of perfectly filtered photos of the family Thanksgiving celebration, everyone smiling and holding wine glasses, the dinner table set beautifully with fall decorations and candles. The caption read, "Grateful for real family who shows up and supports each other through everything." The comments section was filled with relatives I'd known my entire life praising Brianna and making subtle digs at unnamed people who clearly meant me. Aunt Lorraine had written, "So important to surround yourself with positive energy and let go of toxic people." I ordered Chinese takeout for dinner, something I'd never done on Thanksgiving before, and sat cross-legged on my couch trying to convince myself not to look at social media but ultimately failing because I couldn't help myself. Brianna's Instagram was full of perfectly filtered photos of the family Thanksgiving celebration, everyone smiling and holding wine glasses, the dinner table set beautifully with fall decorations and candles. The caption read, "Grateful for real family who shows up and supports each other through everything." The comments section was filled with relatives I'd known my entire life praising Brianna and making subtle digs at unnamed people who clearly meant me. Aunt Lorraine had written, "So important to surround yourself with positive energy and let go of toxic people." Around 2 in the afternoon, a knock at my door startled me out of my fog, and I considered ignoring it because I wasn't expecting anyone and didn't have the emotional capacity to deal with solicitors or neighbors. But the knocking continued, more insistent, and finally I dragged myself off the couch and looked through the peephole to see the last person I expected standing in my hallway. Preston, my sister's fiancé, was shifting his weight nervously from foot to foot, looking around as if worried someone might see him there. I stood frozen with confusion, unable to understand why this man would be at my apartment, wondering if Brianna had sent him to deliver some new accusation or punishment. I heard movement inside and Preston leaned closer to the door, his voice barely above a whisper. "Harper, I know you're home," he said urgently. Around 2 in the afternoon, a knock at my door startled me out of my fog, and I considered ignoring it because I wasn't expecting anyone and didn't have the emotional capacity to deal with solicitors or neighbors. But the knocking continued, more insistent, and finally I dragged myself off the couch and looked through the peephole to see the last person I expected standing in my hallway. Preston, my sister's fiancé, was shifting his weight nervously from foot to foot, looking around as if worried someone might see him there. I stood frozen with confusion, unable to understand why this man would be at my apartment, wondering if Brianna had sent him to deliver some new accusation or punishment. I heard movement inside and Preston leaned closer to the door, his voice barely above a whisper. "Harper, I know you're home," he said urgently. I stepped back and let him enter my small apartment, suddenly self-conscious about the mess and my appearance and the entire situation. But Preston didn't seem to notice or care about any of that. He paced the length of my living room several times, running his hands through his hair, clearly struggling with how to begin whatever conversation had brought him here. Finally, he stopped and turned to face me, and the words that came out of his mouth were the last thing I expected to hear. "I'm not who you think I am," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "And Brianna, she's not who anyone thinks she is. I need you to understand that before I tell you everything else, because what I'm about to say is going to sound insane, but every word of it is true." Preston explained that Head met Brianna 8 months earlier at an influencer event in downtown Chicago, one of those carefully orchestrated social media gatherings where brands paid attractive people to take photos with their products and post them online. Had been there as a favor to a friend who worked in marketing. Not really his scene at all. But Brianna had approached him with confidence and charm that he found flattering. Shed pursued him aggressively in the weeks that followed, showing up at places she somehow knew he'd be, sending him thoughtful messages, making him feel like the most interesting man Shed ever met. He was flattered by the attention from this beautiful, popular woman, and he fell into the relationship without really examining what was happening or why. But very quickly, he started noticing things that didn't add up, behaviors that seemed strange or concerning but that he brushed aside because he wanted to believe in the perfect relationship they were supposedly building. The problems became impossible to ignore as the relationship progressed. Brianna's obsession with social media was pathological in a way Preston had never encountered, every moment of their relationship existing primarily to be documented and shared online. Nothing was authentic or spontaneous. Everything was staged, rehearsed, shot from multiple angles until Brianna got the perfect image to post with carefully crafted captions that bore little resemblance to what had actually happened. Their engagement was the worst of it, a proposal Preston had planned to be intimate and meaningful that Brianna had hijacked completely, repositioning him multiple times to get better lighting, making him repeat his proposal speech because she hadn't captured it properly on video the first time. The entire experience feeling more like a photo shoot than one of the most important moments of his life. But what really opened Preston's eyes was the engagement party incident with me. Had been standing across the room when he saw me talking to his cousin Garrett, and from his vantage point, it looked completely innocent. Two people having a normal conversation, nothing flirtatious or inappropriate about it, just polite small talk at a social event. But Brianna had spotted us, and her reaction was immediate and intense, her face transforming into something dark and angry that Preston had only seen glimpses of before but never fully witnessed. Later that night, after the party had ended and everyone had gone home and I'd been sent away in humiliation, Brianna had ranted about me for hours. "She's always trying to steal my spotlight," Brianna had said with a viciousness that shocked Preston. "She can't stand that I'm successful and happy and that everyone loves me." Preston had been confused by this assessment because from everything Head observed, I'd barely participated in the party at all, standing quietly in corners and seeming uncomfortable and trying not to draw attention to myself. "That's because I know what she's like," Brianna had snapped when Head pointed this out. "She's sneaky and manipulative, and she's been jealous of me our entire lives." The more Preston listened to Brianna talk about me over the following days and weeks, the more he started seeing a pattern that disturbed him deeply. Every story she told painted me as a villain, jealous and attention-seeking, and constantly trying to undermine her happiness. But the stories didn't match the reality of what Preston had observed with his own eyes. The person Brianna described bore no resemblance to the quiet, seemingly kind woman who'd been at the engagement party. The one who'd looked hurt and confused when she was being accused of things she clearly hadn't done. Preston started paying closer attention, and he realized something that made him feel sick. Everything Brianna accused me of, every negative trait she attributed to me, was actually a description of Brianna herself. She was projecting all of her own worst characteristics onto me and using me as a scapegoat to deflect attention from her own behavior. And everyone in the family believed her because Shed spent years carefully constructing a narrative where she was the victim and I was the villain, and nobody ever thought to question whether her version of events was actually true. Preston sat down on my couch heavily, like the weight of what he was telling me had become too much to carry while standing, and he looked at me with something like shame in his eyes before continuing. "The reason I came here today, the reason I'm telling you all of this now, is because of what happened at Thanksgiving dinner," he said quietly. "I sat at that table with your family and watched them celebrate your absence like it was something to be grateful for, and I couldn't stay silent anymore because what I saw was abuse, Harper. What I saw was a family collectively bullying someone who wasn't even there to defend herself, and I realized I'd been complicit in it by staying silent this whole time." He described the Thanksgiving dinner in painful detail, how Brianna had made cruel jokes about my absence throughout the meal, saying things like, "At least we can enjoy our food without any drama this year," and everyone had laughed as if this was funny instead of deeply hurtful. How my dad had agreed enthusiastically, raising his wine glass and saying something about how sometimes you had to make hard choices to protect the peace of your family. How Diane had added with false sympathy, "Some people just can't be happy for others, and it's sad, but you have to let them go for your own well-being." Preston had felt physically ill sitting there listening to this, watching an entire family congratulate themselves for excluding their own daughter and sister, and had excused himself from the table to stand outside in the cold, trying to process what kind of people had become entangled with. After Thanksgiving, Preston had started doing something he probably should have done months earlier. Had started investigating, looking through Brianna's social media history, not as a loving boyfriend, admiring his girlfriend's content, but as someone trying to understand who she really was beneath the carefully curated exterior. What he found shocked him. Going back through years of Instagram posts and Facebook albums, he found old photos that included me, images from family gatherings and holidays and celebrations where I was clearly present and part of the family. But then, starting about 5 years ago, something changed. The photos that included me started disappearing, deleted from her timeline entirely. New versions of old photos appeared where I'd been cropped out or digitally removed, my existence erased from the visual record of Brianna's life. In her more recent posts, Shed crafted a complete narrative where she was essentially an only child, her family consisting only of Dad and Diane, and occasionally extended relatives. But me? I'd been systematically removed from her story, written out of her history, made to not exist in the version of her life she presented to the world. But the discovery that disturbed Preston most came by accident when Brianna had left her laptop open one afternoon and had glanced at the screen. Bank statements were pulled up showing financial information Preston had never seen before, and what they revealed was shocking. Brianna was in massive debt, over $50,000 spread across multiple credit cards, all of it from purchasing designer clothes and accessories for her Instagram content. The lifestyle she portrayed online, the expensive restaurants and luxury vacations and endless shopping hauls, none of it was real or sustainable. Her influencer income barely covered the minimum payments on her debt, and she was living in a house of cards that could collapse at any moment. The perfect life Shed convinced everyone she was living, including Preston himself, was a complete fabrication, a performance maintained through debt and deception, and an obsession with appearances that had spiraled completely out of control. Preston had spent days piecing everything together like a puzzle, and what emerged was a picture he could barely believe, even though the evidence was right in front of him. The real reason Brianna had sabotaged me at the engagement party wasn't because I'd done anything wrong or inappropriate. It was because Garrett, Preston's cousin, was a successful venture capitalist with connections throughout the tech and business world, and we'd been exchanging business cards and talking about professional opportunities. Brianna had seen that interaction and panicked because if I had connected with Garrett professionally or even personally, if I'd found success or happiness or any kind of positive outcome from that conversation, she couldn't tolerate it. The thought of me having something good, anything good, was intolerable to her, because her entire identity was built on being the successful sister, the chosen daughter, the one who had everything while I had nothing. Shed seen us talking and immediately went into attack mode, creating a scene and spinning a narrative, and making sure I was removed from the situation before any connection could form that might benefit me. Preston's breaking point came the day after Thanksgiving when Brianna had gotten drunk on leftover wine and her carefully maintained mask had slipped completely. "I made sure Dad uninvited Harper from Thanksgiving," Shed said with a laugh, sprawled on her couch and scrolling through her phone looking at engagement photos. I sent him screenshots of her and Garrett talking at the party and told him she was hitting on him inappropriately and trying to seduce Preston's family to cause problems with the engagement. Preston had felt his blood run cold as she continued talking, clearly proud of her manipulation. Told Dad she was trying to ruin my happiness and make everything about her like she always does, Brianna had said, taking another sip of wine. He was so angry at her, it was perfect. She'll never be part of this family now. And honestly, good riddance. Shed laughed again, and Preston had realized he was looking at someone he didn't recognize, someone capable of cruelty and manipulation at a level he'd never imagined. That's why I'm here, Preston said, looking at me with genuine remorse in his eyes. I can't marry someone capable of doing this to her own sister. I can't build a life with someone who would systematically destroy another person's relationships and reputation for no reason except jealousy and spite. You deserve to know the truth about what really happened and why your family turned against you, because none of it was your fault, Harper. None of it. But as he said this, I could see the conflict on his face. The fear of what would happen when he broke off the engagement, the knowledge that Brianna wouldn't go down quietly and that his own family had already been poisoned against him for even questioning her version of events. "What are you going to do?" I asked him, and he looked at me with uncertainty that told me he didn't have an answer yet. After Preston left my apartment that day, I sat in silence for hours trying to process everything Head told me and figure out what I wanted to do with this information. Part of me wanted revenge, wanted to expose Brianna to everyone and watch her perfect facade crumble and make everyone see what Shed done to me. But a bigger part of me just wanted acknowledgement, wanted my dad to hear the truth and believe me for once, wanted someone in my family to choose me instead of automatically siding with Brianna without question. I decided I would try one more time to reach out to my dad, to lay out the facts calmly, and give him a chance to hear my side of the story and maybe, finally, see me as someone worthy of being heard. If he still chose to believe Brianna's lies after that, then I would walk away permanently and build a life without any of them in it. The next morning, Sunday, I called my dad's cell phone expecting it to go to voicemail like it had every other time I'd tried to reach him in the past few weeks. But, surprisingly, he answered on the third ring, his voice guarded and slightly annoyed. "What is it, Harper?" he said without preamble, and I took a deep breath before launching into what I needed to say. "Dad, I need to talk to you about what really happened at the engagement party," I began, trying to keep my voice steady and calm. "I need you to hear my side of the story because I think there's been a huge misunderstanding about what actually occurred." There was a long pause on the other end of the line before he spoke, and when he did, his tone was cold and dismissive. "I think we've discussed this enough, Harper," he said flatly. "I'm not interested in rehashing old conflicts or listening to you make excuses for your behavior." I felt something crack inside me at those words, at the complete unwillingness to even consider that maybe, just maybe, he didn't have the full story. "No, we haven't discussed this at all," I said, my voice rising despite my attempts to stay calm. "You never asked for my side, Dad. You took Brianna's word as absolute truth and cut me out of the family without ever giving me a chance to explain what actually happened." He sighed heavily, the sound of a parent dealing with a difficult child who just won't understand reason. "Harper, this victim mentality is exhausting," he said, and those words hit me like a physical blow. Victim mentality, as if spending my entire life being treated as less than, being overlooked and dismissed and blamed for things I didn't do, was somehow my own fault for perceiving it wrong. As if the pain of being systematically excluded from my own family was just me playing victim instead of responding to actual mistreatment. Something broke loose inside me then. All the years of swallowing my feelings and trying to be the good daughter and keeping the peace so I wouldn't rock the boat. "I have never once played victim," I said, my voice shaking with emotion. "I have spent my entire life trying to earn your love, trying to be good enough, trying to matter to you even half as much as Brianna does." And I listed it all then. Every example of differential treatment I could think of. The cars and the college tuition and the celebrations for her versus the silence for me. the way every accomplishment I achieved was minimized, while her mediocre efforts were praised to the heavens. My dad's responses were textbook gaslighting. You're being dramatic. You're remembering things wrong. Brianna needed more support because she was younger and more sensitive. Every excuse designed to make me doubt my own lived experience and perception of reality. Preston came to see me yesterday, I said finally, playing what I thought was my trump card. He told me what really happened, what Brianna said, how she manipulated you into uninviting me from Thanksgiving. There was silence on the other end of the line, heavy and long, and for a moment I thought maybe I'd gotten through to him. But when he spoke again, his words shattered that hope immediately. Preston is confused, he said slowly. The wedding planning has been stressful and he's not thinking clearly. You shouldn't have involved him in this family matter, Harper. That's inappropriate and manipulative. He was blaming me for Preston coming forward, finding a way to make even this my fault, refusing to consider for even a second that Brianna might have lied to him. I felt desperation rising in my chest, the need to make him understand overwhelming everything else. If you can't even consider the possibility that I might be telling the truth, then we have no relationship, I said, the words coming out shakier than I wanted. Don't be dramatic, he responded immediately. You're my daughter and I love you. But you need to stop this jealousy of your sister and accept that your behavior has consequences. The word love felt hollow coming from his mouth. A word without meaning or action behind it. Just something you were supposed to say to your children regardless of how you actually treated them. Then act like I'm your daughter, I said, my voice breaking. For once in my life, choose me. Ask Brianna for the truth. Really ask her, and see if her story holds up when someone actually questions it. But he wouldn't budge, couldn't budge, because admitting that Brianna might have lied would mean admitting had been wrong about me for years, maybe my entire life. And that was too much for his ego to handle. I'm not interrogating your sister over your jealousy issues, he said firmly. You need to take responsibility for your own actions and stop blaming everyone else for your problems. I realized in that moment that nothing would change his mind. No amount of evidence or testimony or truth would ever be enough to make him see me differently. And I felt a strange sense of liberation mixed with profound grief. Then I'm done, I said quietly. Don't contact me unless you're ready to actually hear the truth and consider that maybe you've been wrong about me. I hung up before he could respond, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. And I sat there in my apartment feeling like I'd just closed a door on my entire family, but knowing it was the right thing to do, even though it hurt more than anything I'd ever experienced. 2 hours later, my phone started exploding with text messages, dozens of them coming in rapid succession from various family members. Aunt Lorraine wrote, "How dare you go after Preston and try to break up your sister's engagement?" Cousin Melissa sent, "I can't believe you'd stoop this low, Harper. This is genuinely disturbing behavior." Uncle Harold, who I'd barely spoken to in years, felt compelled to message me about my inappropriate obsession with causing family drama. I realized quickly what had happened. Brianna had gotten ahead of the story, spinning a new narrative before the old one could be questioned. She'd told everyone that I had confessed romantic feelings for Preston and tried to seduce him, that I'd invited him to my apartment and made inappropriate advances. And that's why he'd come to see me. She was playing the victim perfectly, posting vague messages on social media about toxic family members and protecting your peace and knowing when to cut people off for your own mental health. The comments section filled with supportive messages from strangers and family members alike, everyone rallying around poor Brianna, who was being victimized by her jealous, unstable sister. My cousin Melissa, who'd said she couldn't get involved just weeks earlier, sent me a long text message detailing all the ways I needed professional help and how my obsession with Brianna was unhealthy and concerning. Aunt Lorraine called and left a voicemail saying she was genuinely worried about my mental state and suggesting I check myself into some kind of treatment program. Every single person believed Brianna's version of events without question, and nobody, not one person, reached out to ask if maybe there was more to the story, or if perhaps they should hear both sides before passing judgment. My best friend Savannah was absolutely furious when I told her what was happening, telling me my family was toxic and abusive and that I needed to cut them off completely and never look back. But even with her support, the weight of being completely rejected by everyone who shared my blood was crushing in a way I couldn't adequately describe. Monday evening, my phone rang with a number I now recognized as Preston's, and I answered it with trepidation, wondering what new disaster he was calling to report. "Brianna knows I came to see you," he said without preamble, his voice tight with stress. "She told everyone you tried to seduce me?" I replied flatly, and I heard him exhale sharply on the other end of the line. "I know, and am so sorry, Harper. I've been trying to correct the story, but no one's listening to me." He explained that Brianna had become suspicious about where Head been that Saturday afternoon, and when Head tried to deflect her questions, Shed checked the location history on his phone and seen that Head been at my address. The confrontation that followed had been explosive, with Brianna immediately creating the narrative about me confessing feelings and making advances. And by the time Preston had tried to explain the truth, Shed already sent out messages to family members spinning her version of events. Even worse, Brianna had managed to turn Preston's own family against him for what she called his betrayal of visiting his fiancé's troubled sister without telling her. Preston's mother had called him, expressing disappointment that he would put himself in such an inappropriate situation, and his father had sent a stern email about maintaining proper boundaries with unstable individuals. The poison had spread beyond my family now, infecting Preston's relationships too, and he sounded defeated when he told me about it. But he hadn't given up completely, and what he said next gave me a small flicker of hope. "I have proof, Harper," he said urgently. "Text messages where Brianna admits what she did, screenshots of her Thanksgiving night confessions about manipulating your dad into uninviting you. I can send these to your father, and he won't be able to deny written evidence from his own daughter." I was hesitant, knowing how skilled my dad was at denial and justification, but I agreed that it was worth trying. Preston said he would send the screenshots that evening, and maybe, finally, the truth would be undeniable. Tuesday morning came and went with no word from my dad, and I assumed he was processing what had seen in the screenshots Preston had sent. But when he finally called in the early afternoon, the first words out of his mouth told me everything I needed to know about how this was going to go. "You manipulated Preston into turning against Brianna," he said, his voice tight with anger. "You twisted everything to make yourself look like the victim and her look like the villain, and now you're trying to destroy her relationship and her happiness out of pure spite and jealousy." I felt like I was losing my mind, wondering how he could possibly look at written evidence of Brianna's own admissions and still find a way to blame me for everything. "Dad, read the texts," I said desperately. "She literally admits she lied to you, that she sent you fake screenshots and manipulated you into uninviting me. Those are her own words." He had an answer ready, a justification that allowed him to maintain his worldview where Brianna was perfect and I was the problem. "Those texts are taken out of context," he insisted. "She was drunk and joking around with Preston, and you're twisting her words to fit your narrative. It doesn't prove anything except that you're willing to weaponize private conversations to attack your sister." The mental gymnastics required to reach that conclusion were Olympic level, but Head managed it, and I realized there was literally no evidence that would ever be enough to make him admit He'd been wrong about me. And then he dropped a bomb that took my breath away. "I'm removing you from my will," he said coldly. "I've already contacted my attorney to begin the paperwork. I won't reward this kind of destructive behavior, and I won't leave my estate to someone who's actively trying to tear this family apart." The cruelty of it was breathtaking, using inheritance as a weapon to punish me for telling the truth. But it also clarified something important. This wasn't about the engagement party or Thanksgiving or even Preston. This was about a pattern that had existed my entire life, and nothing I did or said would ever change it. An hour after that devastating phone call, my phone rang again, and this time it was Diane calling, with her voice dripping with false sweetness and concern. "Harper, honey," she began in that condescending tone Shed perfected over the years, "we're all very concerned about your mental health right now. Your behavior over the past few weeks has been increasingly erratic and troubling, and we think you might be having some kind of breakdown. She suggested, with barely concealed glee, that I was showing signs of instability and jealousy and potentially dangerous obsession with my sister. We want to help you, she continued, and am happy to pay for a good therapist who can help you work through whatever is causing you to lash out like this. The implication was clear. Paint me as mentally unstable. Question my grip on reality. Make everyone doubt anything I said by framing it as the delusions of someone who needed professional intervention. I hung up on her without responding, my hands shaking with rage and hurt, knowing that she was probably already texting family members about my unhinged behavior in refusing help. Wednesday came with a text from my dad that I initially hoped might be an apology or at least an opening for real conversation. Family meeting Friday night at 6, the message read. You need to be there. No explanation of what the meeting was about or why it was necessary, just a command that I show up. I should have known better. Should have recognized this for what it was. But some desperate part of me still hoped that maybe this would be the moment when everything got cleared up and my family finally heard the truth. I responded that I would be there, spent the next 2 days anxiously preparing what I wanted to say, practicing how I could calmly and clearly explain everything that had happened without getting emotional or defensive. Friday evening, I dressed carefully in clothes that looked put together and professional, wanting to appear stable and rational, and drove to my dad's house with my heart pounding and my palms sweating. I walked into an ambush. The living room was filled with people, my entire extended family arranged in a semicircle facing one chair that had clearly been left empty for me. Aunt Lorraine and Uncle Harold, cousin Melissa and her husband, Diane's sister and brother-in-law, even some family friends I barely knew, all sitting there with expressions ranging from concern to condemnation. Brianna sat on the couch next to my dad, her eyes red as if she'd been crying, tissues clutched in her hand for effect. Preston stood in the corner looking miserable and trapped, and when our eyes met briefly, I saw apology and shame in his expression, but he said nothing. My dad gestured to the empty chair. "Sit down, Harper," he said in the tone he probably used with hostile witnesses in court. "We're here because we're all very worried about you, and we need to address some concerning patterns of behavior." What followed was one of the most painful experiences of my life. A coordinated intervention where each family member took turns listing my supposed faults and concerning behaviors, all of it based entirely on Brianna's fictional narrative about who I was and what I'd done. Aunt Lorraine talked about my jealousy of Brianna that apparently stretched back to childhood, citing examples I had no memory of because they'd never happened. Uncle Harold expressed concern about my inability to be happy for my sister's success and my need to make everything about me. Cousin Melissa, who Eid once considered a friend, talked about how Eid always been obsessed with attention and validation, and how it was sad to watch me spiral like this. Each person spoke about my attempt to seduce my sister's fiancé, about my spreading of malicious lies to try to break up their engagement, about my refusal to take responsibility for my actions, and my constant playing of the victim. Brianna cried throughout the entire performance, dabbing at her eyes with tissues and occasionally letting out small sobs, the picture of a suffering sister who just wanted her family member to get help. Preston stood silent in the corner, and I understood why he couldn't speak up. His family was in the room, his parents sitting there nodding along with everyone else's assessments, and if he defended me now, he'd be isolated from his own family the same way I was being cut off from mine. I sat through 20 minutes of this coordinated attack, listening to my character being assassinated by people who were supposed to love me, hearing myself described as someone I didn't recognize and had never been. And then I stood up, cutting off Diane mid-sentence as she was explaining how my behavior showed clear signs of a personality disorder. "I'm done," I said clearly, my voice surprisingly steady despite the tears streaming down my face. "You want me to be the villain in this story? Fine. I'm the villain. You need me to be the problem so you don't have to examine your own behavior or question the golden child? I'll be the problem. But I want you all to know this, and I want you to remember it when the truth eventually comes out, because it always does. I have never done anything to hurt any of you. I have spent my entire life trying to earn love that was never going to be available to me because you decided long ago who deserved it and who didn't. Brianna has lied and manipulated and systematically destroyed my relationships with all of you, and every single one of you chose to believe her without ever once asking for my side of the story. I walked toward the door as voices called after me, Diane saying something about how my inability to take responsibility proved their point, my dad standing up and demanding I sit back down and listen. But I kept walking, out the door and to my car, and I drove away from that house knowing I would never go back. That night, I sat in my apartment feeling hollowed out and empty, like everything inside me had been scooped out, leaving just a shell. My phone rang around 9 and I saw Preston's name on the screen, and for a moment I considered not answering because I was so tired of this entire situation and everyone involved in it, but I picked up, and his first words were, "I'm so sorry I didn't speak up tonight. I should have defended you and I didn't, and I hate myself for it." I told him I understood, that his family had been in the room, and he was trapped between impossible choices. But the truth was, part of me did resent his silence, even though I knew it wasn't entirely fair to feel that way. "I'm ending the engagement," he said abruptly. "Tonight. Right now. I'm at Brianna's apartment, and I'm going to tell her it's over and show her that I know everything and am not going to be part of this anymore." Preston called me back around midnight, and from his voice I could tell the conversation with Brianna had not gone the way Head expected. Head gone to her apartment and confronted her with everything, showing her the screenshots Head taken of her text messages, telling her he knew about the lies and the manipulation and the systematic destruction of my relationship with my family. Head expected her to break down or apologize or at least drop the act since she'd been caught. But instead what happened shocked him to his core. Brianna had listened to everything he said, and then Shed simply smiled and told him he was making a huge mistake. "My father is a lawyer," Shed said calmly, as if discussing the weather. "If you break up with me, I'll tell everyone you abused me. I'll say you were controlling and manipulative, and that's why I've been acting strange lately. Everyone will believe me, Preston. Who are you? You're just some finance guy from Connecticut. I'm an influencer with 200,000 followers and a family who believes everything I say. You think you can win this?" The threat had been delivered so casually, so confidently, that Preston realized he was seeing the real Brianna for the first time, the person who existed underneath all the performance and artifice and carefully maintained image. Head told her he was ending the engagement regardless of her threats, that he wouldn't marry someone capable of such cruelty and manipulation, and Brianna had shrugged and told him Head regret it. Within an hour of Preston leaving her apartment, Brianna's Instagram was updated with a long, emotional post about escaping an abusive relationship and how grateful she was to have seen the warning signs before it was too late. The post was carefully worded to imply control and manipulation and emotional abuse without making any specific claims that could be legally challenged, and the comments section immediately filled with supportive messages from her followers, expressing relief that she'd gotten out safely and praising her bravery in speaking up. And then, in a move that was almost admirable for its sheer audacity, Brianna posted another message in her Instagram stories. "My sister tried to warn me about him and I didn't listen. She saw things I was too in love to see. Thank God she protected me even when I pushed her away. I'm so grateful for family who really shows up when it matters." The complete reversal of narrative was breathtaking in its boldness. In the public story she was now telling her followers and the world at large, I had somehow become the hero who'd tried to warn her about Preston's supposed abuse. But in the private story she continued to tell our family, I remained the villain who'd tried to seduce her fiancé and destroy her happiness. She was running two completely contradictory narratives simultaneously and somehow making both of them work, and I realized I was dealing with someone who was genuinely skilled at manipulation in a way I'd never fully appreciated before. My family, of course, continued to believe the private narrative over the public one, seeing her Instagram posts as face-saving measures rather than admissions that maybe they'd been wrong about everything. The weekend following the breakup brought unexpected support from an unlikely source. Garrett, Preston's cousin who'd sparked this entire disaster by having an innocent conversation with me at the engagement party, reached out via email. Preston told me everything that's been happening, he wrote, and am horrified that a simple professional conversation at a party led to all of this. I wanted you to know that the design contract I mentioned is yours if you still want it, and this offer is based purely on your portfolio, which I reviewed and found impressive. It's a 6-month project with the potential for extension, and the pay is competitive. I hope you'll consider working with us regardless of all this family drama. It was the first time in months that someone had chosen me based on my actual merit rather than family politics, and I accepted the contract immediately, feeling like maybe something good could come out of this nightmare after all. My best friend, Savannah, who'd been my rock through everything, organized a small gathering that Sunday with a few of our closest friends, calling it Friendsgiving, even though we were well past Thanksgiving at this point. We ate pizza and watched movies, and nobody brought up my family, or the drama, or any of the painful things I'd been dealing with. And for a few hours I felt normal again, surrounded by people who chose to be in my life because they actually liked me rather than because they were obligated by blood to tolerate my existence. It showed me what real support looked like, what it felt like to be around people who believed me and valued me, and didn't constantly make me question my own reality or worth. Sunday morning brought another phone call from my dad, and stupidly, foolishly, I hoped for a moment that maybe he was calling to apologize, or at least to acknowledge that the situation had gotten out of hand. Instead, his first words were, "I hope you're happy now. You destroyed your sister's engagement and humiliated her in front of everyone, and I hope whatever satisfaction you got from it was worth losing your entire family." I felt something inside me shut down completely, a protective mechanism clicking into place. "I didn't destroy anything," I said flatly, my voice empty of emotion. "Preston made his own choice based on Brianna's actual behavior, not anything I said or did. Did you even read the screenshots he sent you? Did you actually look at the evidence of what she did?" But my dad wasn't interested in evidence or truth or anything that contradicted the story Head decided to believe. "He was fine until you poisoned him against her," he insisted. "The engagement was perfect until you interfered out of jealousy and spite. Brianna is devastated," my dad continued, "and now she has to deal with canceling the venue and losing deposits, and explaining to all her friends and followers why the engagement is off. You've caused nothing but pain and destruction, and I want you to know that there are consequences for that." I felt a bitter laugh escape before I could stop it. "Consequences?" I repeated. "What consequences could possibly be worse than what you've already done, Dad? You uninvited me from Thanksgiving, turned the entire family against me, and told me I was dead to you. What's left?" There was a pause, and then he said something that genuinely shocked me even after everything else. "You're not welcome at Christmas or any other family events going forward. This isn't temporary, Harper. You're no longer part of this family. Don't contact us again." The finality of it was like a door slamming shut, and when I asked if he meant permanently, his response was immediate. "I mean, you're not invited to any family gatherings ever again. You are dead to us." And then he hung up. The following Tuesday, a certified letter arrived at my apartment from my dad's law firm, thick and official looking, and making my stomach drop before I even opened it. Inside was a detailed legal document explaining that I was being formally removed from Richard Morrison's will and testament, that all assets, property, and possessions, including family heirlooms and items that had belonged to my late mother, would be distributed solely to Brianna Morrison upon his death. The language was cold and legalistic, laying out exactly how I was being erased, not just from the family but from any future claim to anything that had once been mine by right of birth. The cruelty of it was stunning, the deliberate effort to ensure I would receive nothing, not even the necklace my mother had worn every day and had always promised would be mine someday, not even the photo albums from my childhood or any physical reminder that it once belonged to these people. It wasn't about the money or the things themselves, though losing my mother's belongings hurt more than I could express. It was about the message, the formal legal declaration that I was worth nothing to them, that had been judged and found wanting and would be punished accordingly. That same week, I received a phone call from a number I didn't recognize, and when I answered, I heard my cousin Melissa's voice, quiet and scared, and nothing like the confident condemnation Shed delivered at the intervention. "I need to tell you something," she said without preamble. "I was at Brianna's apartment the night Preston broke up with her. I live in the same building, 2 floors down, and the walls are thin." She explained that Shed heard the entire confrontation through her ceiling, heard Preston laying out all of Brianna's lies and manipulations, heard Brianna threatening him with false accusations of abuse, heard the complete dropping of Brianna's sweet victim act and the cold, calculated person underneath. "I realized I'd been defending a monster," Melissa said, her voice thick with tears. "Everything you said was true, Harper. Everything we all accused you of. It was really her. And I'm so sorry I didn't believe you." I waited for her to say she would speak up, would tell the rest of the family what Shed heard, would finally give me the vindication and support it'd been desperately seeking. But instead she said, "I can't tell anyone else though. My parents would disown me if I went against the family consensus, and I can't afford to lose them right now because I'm going through a divorce and I need their help with housing and childcare. I'm so sorry, Harper. I know that's not what you want to hear, but I can't sacrifice my own stability to fix this, even though I know it's wrong." I understood her position intellectually, could recognize that she was trapped in her own impossible situation and needed her parents' support to survive. But emotionally it was devastating to have someone admit it'd been right all along and then refuse to do anything about it because protecting themselves was more important than protecting me. Even those who knew the truth, who'd heard it with their own ears directly from Brianna's mouth, chose their own comfort and security over standing up for what was right. And I couldn't entirely blame Melissa for that choice, even though it hurt, because I understood now that this was what my family did. They protected the system, protected the hierarchy, protected their own positions within the structure, and anyone who threatened that stability got cut loose regardless of truth or justice or basic human decency. The weeks following my permanent excommunication from my family were some of the darkest of my life, a period of grief that felt similar to when my mother had died except worse in some ways, because this was a chosen abandonment rather than an unavoidable tragedy. I started therapy with a woman named Dr. Chen who specialized in family trauma and narcissistic abuse, and in our sessions I began to see patterns I'd lived with my entire life but had never fully understood or named. She explained the concept of the scapegoat in dysfunctional family systems, how some children are designated to carry all the family's dysfunction and blame so that everyone else can maintain their illusion of being good people. She helped me understand that nothing I'd ever done or could have done would have changed my position in that family structure because the scapegoat role existed independent of my actual behavior or worthiness. The role needed to be filled, and I'd been chosen for it long before I was old enough to understand what was happening, possibly as far back as when my mother died, and Diane decided her biological daughter would be the favored child in the new family configuration. Dr. Chen helped me make a decision that felt simultaneously liberating and devastating. Complete no contact with my entire family was necessary for my mental health and healing, she explained. Continuing to expose myself to people who were determined to misunderstand and malign me would only perpetuate the trauma and prevent me from building a healthy sense of self-worth. I blocked phone numbers and social media accounts, changed my own number so they couldn't reach me even if they tried, and made the difficult choice to cut off not just my immediate family but extended relatives who'd participated in my destruction. The grief was immense because I wasn't just mourning the family I had. I was mourning the family I'd always hoped they might become. The parents and sister who might someday see me and value me and choose me. Letting go of that hope felt like a kind of death. But Dr. Chen assured me it was necessary to make room for actual healing, rather than staying stuck in a cycle of hoping for change that would never come. I threw myself into work with an intensity that surprised me, channeling all my pain and anger and hurt into building something that was mine and that nobody could take away from me. The design contract from Garrett led to introductions to other clients, and within 6 months I had a steady roster of projects and income stability I'd never experienced before. I was good at what I did, it turned out, when I wasn't constantly consumed by family drama and the emotional exhaustion of trying to prove my worth to people who'd already decided I had none. My portfolio grew, my professional reputation built, and for the first time in my life, I felt proud of something it accomplished without that pride being immediately undercut by comparison to Brianna or dismissal from my father. Savannah helped me furnish my new apartment after I moved to a bigger place in a better neighborhood. And I deliberately chose not to hang any family photos on my walls because those images were too painful, and I needed my home to be a sanctuary rather than a reminder of everything I'd lost. The months passed, and gradually, painfully, I began to heal. The constant anxiety that had lived in my chest for as long as I could remember, the feeling that I was always one mistake away from being rejected or punished or cast out, slowly loosened its grip. I made new friends through work and through Savannah's social circle. People who knew me only as Harper the designer, Harper the friend, Harper the person I actually was, rather than Harper the scapegoat or Harper the disappointing daughter. I started dating someone I met through a design conference, a kind man named James, who listened when I talked about my family history and never once suggested that maybe I was remembering things wrong or being too sensitive or should just forgive and move on. He accepted my boundaries around family contact and never pressured me to reconcile, understanding that some relationships are too toxic to maintain regardless of blood ties. 9 months after the final break with my family, I received an email not to my personal address but through my professional website's contact form. It was from Preston, writing to tell me he'd moved to Seattle for a fresh start after Brianna had tried to damage his professional reputation by spreading rumors in Chicago's finance circles. Most of his colleagues hadn't believed her stories, he wrote, because his reputation for integrity was well established and her accusations were vague and inconsistent, but the whole experience had soured him on staying in a city where he might run into her or her family at any social or professional event. I think about how I failed you at that intervention often, he wrote toward the end of the email. You deserved someone to stand up for you, to tell the truth when it mattered most, and I didn't do that. I let fear of social consequences and family disapproval keep me silent when I should have been loudest. I hope you're well and that you've found peace, because you deserve that more than anyone I know. I appreciated the apology but realized I didn't need it anymore, didn't need external validation or acknowledgement to know that I'd been wronged and that none of what happened had been my fault. A full year after going no contact, Thanksgiving came around again, and I braced myself for the familiar dread and sadness that had always accompanied the holiday. But instead of a phone call or attempt at contact from my family, what arrived was an email from my dad's administrative assistant with a subject line that read simply, "Invitation." The body of the email was formal and impersonal. Richard Morrison requests your presence at the family Thanksgiving dinner on Thursday, November 23rd at 6 o'clock in the evening. RSVP by November 20th. There was no personal message from my dad, no apology or acknowledgement of everything that had happened. Just an expectation that I would show up when summoned, as if the past year of being told I was dead to them had never happened. I stared at the email for a long moment, and then I did something that felt powerful and freeing. I laughed. I actually laughed out loud at the absurdity of thinking a formal invitation from an assistant could undo a year of deliberate cruelty and rejection. I deleted the email without responding and blocked the assistant's address too. And that evening I went to Friendsgiving at Savannah's house, where a group of chosen family had gathered, and I realized I was genuinely happy in a way I'd never been during any Thanksgiving with my blood relatives. The lessons I'd learned over the past year were painful but necessary. Truths I wished I'd understood much earlier in life but was grateful to finally comprehend now. Some family members will always choose the easier child to love, the one who fits their expectations and makes them look good, and doesn't challenge their worldview or force them to examine their own behavior. Being designated as the scapegoat wasn't about my worth or value as a person, it was about their limitations and their need for someone to blame for all the dysfunction they didn't want to acknowledge in themselves. Brianna's carefully constructed mask would eventually slip for everyone the way it had for Preston and Melissa. But I didn't need to be there when it happened, because my healing wasn't dependent on them finally seeing the truth or admitting they'd been wrong. Defending yourself to people who are determined to misunderstand you is not just pointless, it's actively harmful because it keeps you stuck in a pattern of seeking validation from people who will never provide it. Real family, Id learned, are the people who choose you consistently, who believe you when you tell them your truth, who support you through difficult times, rather than using your vulnerability as ammunition against you. Savannah, who'd stood by me through everything, and never once doubted my version of events. Garrett, who'd offered me professional opportunities based on merit rather than family politics. James, who loved me without needing me to be perfect or without past or without complicated family trauma. These were my real family. The people Wad earned that designation through their actions, rather than claiming it by accident of shared DNA. I grieved the family Id wished I had, went through a mourning process that was as real and painful as mourning a death, but eventually I reached acceptance of the family I actually had, and the understanding that their limitations were not my responsibility to fix or accommodate. 2 years after cutting contact, I rarely thought about my family anymore, except in therapy sessions, when we were processing old wounds, or in occasional moments when something would trigger a memory. I'd heard through mutual professional contacts that Brianna had gotten engaged again, this time to a man significantly older and wealthier than Preston, and I felt nothing but a distant sense of pity when I saw her Instagram posts about her perfect new relationship. She was still running the same patterns, still performing happiness for an audience while destroying anyone who threatened her carefully maintained image, and I knew with certainty that she would never be genuinely happy, because real happiness requires authenticity and vulnerability, and the ability to form genuine connections with other people. Those were things Brianna had sacrificed long ago in favor of appearances and validation from strangers and the hollow satisfaction of always being the chosen one in a rigged game. My therapist helped me articulate the final lesson that took 2 years of hard work to fully internalize and believe. Some people will never see your value, Shed told me repeatedly until I could finally hear it without defensive protest or secret hope that maybe if I just explained it better or tried harder they'd understand. That doesn't diminish your value, Dr. Chen continued. It reveals their limitations, not yours. They lack the capacity to see you clearly because seeing you would require them to question everything they believe about themselves and their family and their role in your pain. Most people will choose comfortable delusion over uncomfortable truth every single time. Id stopped waiting for the apology that would never come. Stopped hoping my dad would suddenly have an epiphany and realize he'd been wrong about me for my entire life. Stopped checking Brianna's social media to see if her facade had cracked yet. Id found freedom in acceptance, in understanding that not everyone deserves access to you, even if they're family. In recognizing that protecting your peace isn't selfish but necessary for survival and growth. Thanksgiving evening of that second year, I sat in my apartment after friends had left from our annual Friendsgiving celebration, and I looked around at the life I'd built from the ashes of my old one. My apartment was small but beautiful, filled with art I'd created and furniture I'd chosen, and photos of people who actually loved me rather than people who shared my last name. My career was thriving. My bank account was stable for the first time ever. My relationships were healthy and reciprocal, and based on genuine affection rather than obligation or manipulation. For the first time in my entire life, I felt free from the constant weight of trying to be good enough, trying to earn love that was never going to be freely given, trying to prove my worth to people who'd decided long ago I had none. My phone buzzed with a notification from an unknown number, and I knew without checking that it was probably my dad or another family member reaching out for the holidays, maybe feeling sentimental or guilty or just wanting to maintain the appearance of family unity. I didn't even look at the message, just deleted the notification without reading it and poured myself a glass of wine. I sat by my window looking out at the city lights, thinking about everything that had happened and everything I'd learned and the person I'd become through the process of losing my family and finding myself. Sometimes the family that traumatizes you isn't the one that deserves your healing, I thought, a truth that had taken me decades to understand and accept, and that's okay. It's okay to walk away from people who hurt you, even if they're related to you by blood. It's okay to choose peace over family unity. It's okay to stop setting yourself on fire to keep other people warm. It's okay to demand better treatment and walk away when you don't receive it. It's okay to grieve people who are still alive but who will never be the parents or siblings or family you needed them to be. It's okay to build a new family from friends and partners and chosen connections that value you for who you actually are. All of this is not just okay, I realized. It's necessary and healthy, and the only path toward genuine happiness and healing. So here's my question for all of you watching this story. Have you ever been the scapegoat in your family? Have you had to make the painful choice to walk away from people who were supposed to love you but who only knew how to hurt you? Drop a comment below and share your experience, because I promise you're not alone in this. And sometimes knowing other people have walked this path and survived makes all the difference. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel, because there are so many more stories about family dynamics and healing and finding your way after loss. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear that it's okay to protect yourself even from family, that choosing yourself isn't selfish, that you deserve love and respect and basic human decency regardless of what your family has told you about your worth. Thank you all for listening to my story and for being part of this community where we can be honest about the complicated, painful, messy reality of family relationships that don't fit the Hallmark movie narrative. I hope wherever you are and whoever you're with this holiday season, you're surrounded by people who choose you, who see you, who value you for exactly who you are. And if you're spending the holidays alone because you've had to cut contact with toxic family, I want you to know that choosing peace over pain is brave and strong and valid, and you're not alone even when it feels like you are. Take care of yourselves, protect your peace, and remember that your worth is not determined by people who refuse to see it. Happy holidays, everyone, and I'll see you in the next video.